Hi there. This video is to introduce the concept of marketisation in terms of education policy. Now, this has already been talked about when we've talked about policy as an overall, but we're now starting to look at 1988 onwards. So you should have studied, before you watch this video, you should have studied kind of 1944, 1870, all the things that happen in the build-up. And then 1988, we're starting to look at the beginning of marketisation. On my website, you've got this booklet, Education Policy, and this video goes with the learning that we're doing in this booklet. Okay. So what it's helpful to do is have in your mind this particular 30-mark question as your kind of background sort of voice or background thinking piece that's happening whilst you're learning everything about marketisation. And the idea is that you want to be able to evaluate the view that the purpose of education policy since 1944, so including everything we're going to look at, has been to reduce inequality. And obviously the flip side to that argument would be that policy since 1944, and including marketisation, has actually increased inequality. So we've got these two sides. Has it reduced inequality? Has it increased inequality? Okay, so that's the question to have in the back of your mind with every point that you learn here. So it all started with the 1988 Education Reform Act. And that was what introduced the national curriculum. So it made things a lot more standardised across the UK, across England. It also introduced SATs and GCSEs. So these were standardised tests which were then able to be measured from school to school. So if schools are all doing the same tests, then it's easy to compare the results. This was also the introduction of league tables. Can you imagine a time where league tables didn't exist? But they didn't. So this was where league tables were introduced. And parental choice, therefore. So league tables are there to inform parental choice, to allow this parentocracy to take place. And this was one of the really core parts of marketisation, because suddenly parents become the customer. So there's a producer-consumer relationship. The producer is the schools, and the consumer is the parent, who is really the customer on behalf of their child. But they're the ones making the choices. And along with this came things like schools having to produce prospectuses, schools having to publish their results, and then obviously the league tables and all the measurements that we see nationally and in the media. We have like the Times top schools measured on lots of different things, and then we have the national league tables that are published as well. What also came alongside this was more budgeting power for heads. So being able to kind of individualise schools and really allow a lot more of a kind of independence in terms of spending, so more of a business model, and funding per pupil. So this funding being attached per head. The closest thing we can kind of link that to is the idea of a voucher system in the USA, where the funding really is attached to the people, and the people can sort of decide how that's going to be spent. Whereas the funding per pupil in the UK goes to the school. So you might want to have a think about when Margaret Thatcher and her government were kind of bringing this in 1988. What was it? And remember, this was a new right government. What were they trying to achieve by doing this? What were their goals? What did they want to do? And how was marketisation of the education system going to achieve this? And I think it's really important here to have the context of what else was happening during this particular period of New Right thinking. So Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan in the USA, so at the same time that they were kind of running the show, they were both very influenced by the teachings of Milton Friedman, who is a well-known economist, a free market economist. And they therefore believed very much in privatisation, individualisation, competition, and this idea that everything would be more effective, more efficient, and higher quality if there was an aspect of competition. And we need to look at Chubb and Moe if we want to back that up with some sociological thinking. So we've started using this word marketisation, but before we go any further, I think we need to be really sure what the term marketisation means. So we've got the word market in there. We're thinking about economic markets, really. If you are somebody who does A-level economics as well, you'll already be thinking, oh, supply and demand, equilibrium, and all those things that go together with markets. But maybe if you don't study business or economics, you're thinking, I don't really know what marketisation is all about. And it's very simple once you get your head around what it means. So essentially, marketisation, if I can get this slide to progress. There we go. Is the exposure of an industry or service to market forces. So when we have public sector organisations like the NHS, like the fire service, like education, we don't expose them to market forces, or we haven't done historically. And then came the new right of thinking of, let's get things marketised, let's expose them to these market forces of supply and demand and producer consumer. Therefore, everything is led on demand based. You're only going to create a demand if you're successful, aren't you? And if you think about that in terms of a shop or a business, if you think about Amazon or Google, how do they create demand? And how do we kind of compare different businesses and then choose which one we're going to shop with? The difference really with schools is that once you choose one, that, we can dip in between different businesses, can't we? But when you choose one, you become a loyal customer of that school. So this includes the element of competition. Marketisation includes the aspect of competition, and it also includes the aspect of the producer-consumer relationship. So if all you take away in terms of marketisation is the element of competition and choice and the producer-consumer relationship, then you're absolutely fine. So the key terms when we talk about marketisation and the Education Reform Act, and that's the 1988 Education Reform Act, the key terms you really need to have that come to your mind when you see a question on marketisation are parental choice, competition, and the producer-consumer relationship. So competition, it links to everything, league tables, schools competing against each other, marketing themselves, prospectuses and all of that. But also, the competition in terms of feeling the need to be at a significant place in those league tables. Parental choice in terms of being able to choose your school, which to us all, seems so normal, doesn't it? But before this happened, you would just go to your local school. And the best way to understand this is the video that we will watch in class. And if you haven't seen that video, or if I'm not your teacher, then go to YouTube and look at the Finland school system. And there are quite a few videos, and you will just see that the Finnish school system is so completely different. There's no private education, there's no fee paying, there's no competition between schools. The local school is the best school, and that's the best way to get the context of what we mean by parental choice and competition being a new thing. So, in Finland, you don't write down your 5 choices for schools. You go to your local school, and that school expects to get those students, and it doesn't have to compete for them. Okay. So the 1988 Education Act, open enrolment, that's the idea of parental choice. Choice and competition, it created what we can call a market mechanism, and the mechanism is really about supply and demand, and having to create your demand in order to survive. And then this education system where parents have more information and more choice. And now I've put supposedly in brackets there on the slide, because that starts to bring in the critical view. So yes, your new right thinkers, your functionalists are going to say, particularly your new right, are going to say, yeah, parents have got more information, they've got more choice, they can choose what's best for their children. But actually later on, you'll start to look at criticisms of that. So the idea behind this is that schools would have an incentive, school leaders and, those who work for schools and the governors, the teachers, everybody involved really would have this incentive to do better because they need the results, they need reputation, they're competing against other schools. So this kind of marketplace idea. And what that did was it made schools into business models, essentially. So in many, many ways, schools now function as businesses. And that really underpins the idea of marketisation. Okay. So there are two key thinkers that are really important to have in your sociology wardrobe of thinkers, to bring out when you are writing about marketisation and all of this Education Reform Act and everything that happened from 1988 onwards. And one of them you may have come across already when you did the functions of education, and they are Chubb and Moe. And Chubb and Moe are new right thinkers. So they're very much on the side of, they're very pro-marketisation. And what they believe is that individual choice is absolutely key. I mean, this is very typical of any kind of free market thinkers in terms of the economy. They believe that individual choice is key to the success of the education system, that it is really vital in order to improve the quality and the efficiency. So they believe that this marketisation, this competition, this choice, this open enrolment improves standards and efficiency. And by efficiency, we mean really that the schools should, if this is all correct, schools should spend less money. Therefore, they wouldn't need so much budget. They'd be far more efficient. They'd be able to do what they do in an excellent way with, spending a lot less, but still producing the quality. So they really believe that this incentive of marketisation is vital to improve standards. And then on the flip side, we've got Bartlett and Legrand, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I think the more you kind of, keep doing your memory retrieval, and eventually this will become second nature. So Bartlett and Legrand, now their outlook was a real criticism of the idea of marketisation. So one of their criticisms of the market system, and these are concepts to use in your essays, is the idea of cream skimming and silt shifting. And you will hear the cream skimming sometimes referred to as creaming off as well. So creaming and silt shifting. And basically what they're talking about there is the idea that if you create this competition within schools, then schools are going to realise that some students are going to pull down their results because they have maybe more needs, or they're not kind of predisposed to academic study. And as we know, it's quite a narrow set of skills, isn't it, that are rewarded in the school system. So the idea that schools possibly would start to throw out the worst students and select only the best ones. So not necessarily throw them out, but not accept their applications or choose other students instead. So the schools that become more popular can then become more selective about who they take and who they offer places to, particularly schools that have become academies then have even more independence over how they do their enrolment process or their admissions process. So this really conflicts with the idea of meritocracy. So you've got, on one hand, you've got Chubb and Moe saying, no, it's more meritocratic. People are going to make more effort to make their schools better. And then parents are going to make more effort to get their kids into the best school. And this is a real meritocracy. And Bartlett and Legrand are saying this is not a meritocracy because people are being sidelined, and it starts to hint at the idea of social reproduction. And also something else Bartlett and Legrand bring in that really criticises Chubb and Moe is that when schools are under pressure to perform, they start to think about costs, and they're thinking, okay, some students are going to be more costly. They're going to need extra resources. They're going to need a one-to-one teaching assistant. They're going to need extra provision or interventions in order for them to do well. And that's going to cost us money, and then we won't be able to compete. So on one hand, you've got Chubb and Moe saying, having this meritocratic marketized system is going to really make everything more efficient. But then Bartlett and Legrand are saying, yeah, but if in order to be efficient, you're getting rid of some of the students, where do those students go? They have to go somewhere, don't they? So how does that work? That's the question to ask, isn't it? How does that work if nobody wants to take those students? And then what happens to those schools? Do they still, the schools that end up, the inclusive schools that take the students with more needs, how does that work in terms of being more efficient because of the marketisation process? So Bartlett and Legrand are kind of unpicking quite a lot of things that maybe Chubb and Moe's theoretical take on this doesn't highlight or maybe overlook. So you've got two theories there that you can really contrast against each other in one paragraph to show analysis, and you can unpick them to show that balance and evaluation that's needed for the top mark bands.